You're listening to The Big Conversation.
Brought to you by the Cheshire and Merseyside Resilience Hub.
Joined by special guest, Judith Cummings.
On today's episode, we're joined by Judy. Judy is the Hub's Pathways Advisor, who plays a big part in the non-clinical side of the delivery of what we offer. Hey Judy, welcome. How
Hi
are you?
there. I'm very well, thank you, Lee.
Good. So I know you and I know part of your history, but you're not here to talk about that. So why don't you introduce yourself and give our listeners a bit of an insight to who you are and what it is that you've done and how are doing?
Hello, Lee. I am the Pathway Advisor for the Cheshire and Merseyside Resilient Hub. And essentially, that is really trying to support or offering support for staff members based on a social prescription model. So it might be support around, housing, financial difficulties, social exclusion, anything really to complement the therapeutic intervention that they will be already receiving from our clinicians. And that's essentially my role. I also sort of come from a background when it comes to sort of, engaging the general population, getting involved with community activities. I mean, that has been really the theme of many of the jobs that I have done before taking on this position with the hub.
Well, so in terms of a community perspective then, what what is it that you've done with communities previously?
Prior to working in the hub, I worked for many years um, as a mental health advocate, and essentially that was being based in a community where there was a high representation of clients who presented at, acute end of mental health care, working directly with them and representing them and their families who found it very difficult to access services. So we made sure that we engage with the community resources. It could have been around, healthcare, it could be around housing, education, financial difficulties. And we really wanted to make sure that the community voices were represented throughout their journey towards, a better standard of healthcare and mental health care provisions.
Ah, okay, got you. So that's actually really interesting because from what I know about you, I've just actually learned something new about you. And you're my type of person, actually, very community orientated and very community spirited. Um, and you've mentioned with working with communities. Question for you now, though, what is it that makes you want to help people?
I think it stems from my family background, Lee. I think it's based on a situation or period of time when my brother, who was diagnosed with learning disability, found it very difficult to engage services that was community based. So there was a long situation where, excuse me, my parents really struggled to find appropriate, daycare services for him, and also really to find out the best statutory care service that was available for him at the time. So there's always been an aspect of my family and also myself always wanted to help the community, engage the community at every levels of decision making and to make sure that their voices were heard and really create a level playing field so they did not feel overwhelmed or indeed marginalized by the system that they were trying to navigate.
Ah, got you. It's funny how you say about say community voices, if you would, because I was going to ask you your views on communities and their voices and why you think they need to be heard more.
I think it's absolutely essential that community voices are given, as much sort of, freedom as possible, because without those voices, we can't shape the resources that we're trying to provide for people who find themselves in difficult situations. And also that without community, we do not exist as a society. And I think if we don't engage the community and don't listen to their concerns and also the struggles that they are experiencing, we cannot move forward as a society. And I'm very big on, getting society's voices heard, very big on really lobbying for changes It doesn't matter what sector that we're working in. It's very, very important to have our voices as a community heard.
Absolutely, and I think it's that societal impact really, isn't it? Because I always go by the mantra: if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. And with
Absolutely.
a community sense, that aspect, there's so much more to it. So, like thinking about that, you could actually drill it down even further, couldn't you? So, for example, specific communities like say the BAME community or underrepresented communities, it goes a lot further than just the community of what people think the community actually is. There's so many segregated pockets within our society which are effectively cut off, aren't there? So,
Yes.
what would, on that note, then, what would your views be on why community voices and representation matters then?
I think I have actually in the past always sort of tried to represent the community that I am familiar with. And I am very familiar with the BAME community. That is part of my makeup, part of my background. And I think from my personal experience, there have been situations whereby the voices were not heard, their concerns were not heard. And I think there must be a way, and there always has been a way of raising and lobbying for changes based on
Yeah,
marginalized communities. And I think it's so important, to be heard and to be heard in a way that can influence changes within policies, within procedures, and really to make it a just society. Because that's essentially that's what we're all about.
well, that's it. I think we talk about equality, we talk about getting people up to the right level, and I think effectively it's not more about equality; it's about equity. It's about
Absolutely.
not making people equal and just actually bringing people to that level to see over the fence. So, kind of in an imaginary sense, you could have someone who's peering over the fence and they've got all the rights, they've got the views and everything. You've got someone who could stand on a milk crate and just see over it, and that's a bit of equality. But you could have someone who's shorter who could need, say, two milk crates. And I think it's just bringing them up, everybody to the same level, really, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. And it's also about mutual respect and
Mm,
listening to the voices of those people. We can't always get it rightly, but we
yeah,
can empathize. We could, listen, and we could maybe make sort of calls. That's some
yeah,
of the jobs, and to the right agencies, the right authorities, to get them to listen to you as their representative. And it's always about, having keeping an open dialogue and being really receptive to the needs of the people around you and those that you're trying to represent. It's really
absolutely.
important to me.
Absolutely. And I think looking at us as a service as the Resilience Hub, now we're here for everybody. We represent everybody who works in the NHS, social care and emergency services. Um, but it's also getting out there and making the service known to people. And it's allowing them to have the confidence to reach out to us if they need it. But then again, I suppose that's similar for many different workplaces around the country. Um, like if you think about the pandemic, for example, the pandemic itself saw that underrepresented communities was one of the hardest that was hit.
Yes.
And I think from a community viewpoint, whilst things happened and got put in place, it wasn't entirely enough. And I think it's about bringing understanding what it is that that community needs and actually going out. And I think this is why communities count. So I think, what's your views on that? As in,
I totally agree with you. And I think just to add to that, Lee, I think sometimes it's the knowledge, the sort of, the basic knowledge of the community that you are based within, that you have a network of people that you can call upon. And I suppose from my point of view, I've been very lucky to call upon communities that have been marginalized and speaking to their faith leaders. It could be the imam, it could be the priest, it could be the spiritual leader, and trying to get the message out there that we are indeed here to help and support, communities that quote unquote hard to engage. And I
mm,
think local knowledge is really, really essential. Knowing who to go to, knowing who's going to be, the enabler, so to speak, to
yeah,
access communities and to give them that really, really good one-to-one support. I think that's crucial.
I think it's like you said there. It's about knowing, really, isn't it? It's having that knowledge base to actively understand. Um, and I think I totally get everything that you're saying. I think from a community perspective, there's a lot of people within communities who get left behind in day-to-day scenarios, and
Yes.
there's so much more we can do, just not just as workers for organisations, but just as people. And I think from a health perspective, there's we're not doing if we don't do anything, we're not doing nothing. We create more health inequalities. And so
Yes.
then, on that note, I think what we need to be doing is understanding from our ranks inwards, the boots on the ground, that sort of stuff, and asking our communities what it is that they'd like to see from a representative point of view. I think
Yes.
if you was in charge, for example, say the Minister of Communities, I don't know if that's a big thing, but
Yeah.
what would be some of the change that you implement or make happen?
I think the mantra is sometimes, Muhammad and the mountain, to use that analogy. Sometimes you could have the best possible services that's available and you're trying so hard to engage communities, but sometimes you have to come to the people
Yeah,
where that individual is living, where the groups of society, in the groups of different culture reside, and really access them, on their home ground. From my personal point of view, I know that when we were representing service users who lived, say, in one particular part of Liverpool, trying to get them, say, downtown city, it
yeah,
was a huge hurdle because it was like, oh no, Judy, we can't go there. We don't really access the city centre of Liverpool. But it's just
yeah,
engaging those individuals and saying the city is available to everyone. And
yeah.
that's what we're trying to establish. So sometimes you have to turn the model on its head and say, okay, then we know we've got this wonderful provision, but we need to meet people, meet our clients, meet our service users within their own settings, within their own localities. And I speak from experience. It's always worked for me. It
So
really, yes.
would you, on that note, would you turn the mantra then upside down and implement from a say a bottoms up approach?
Yes, I certainly would. I
Yeah.
certainly would. I think
I,
I think it's the best way forward to engage communities as a
yeah.
whole.
I think one thing I've learned is so I've always worked with communities within my career, and that one thing that I've learned is that organizations will love to do stuff for communities, but that's the problem. It's doing for communities and not doing with
With
communities.
communities, correct.
Yeah, so I totally
Yes.
understand you. And like I said, throughout my career, I've worked in the NHS and for lots of different organisations, and I've stepped up the games in terms of, say, representation and making voices heard, and also implemented, say, a range of charters and policies. It's kind of like saying actions rather than words type of thing.
Yeah.
And I
Yes.
think for me, funnily enough, when I was at university, like my time at university, um, the reason I got more involved with the communities is because the president at the time and myself clashed. There
Mm.
was a topic, we clashed. We come together and we sorted our differences. And she actually encouraged me to run as a representative role, so represented the student body. And funnily enough, she's actually now a famous author of the book. It's called "Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race."
Yeah.
And it's really, really insightful, not from a race perspective, but from a community's perspective.
Exactly.
Um, and I think, personally, if I was to make change happen, it would be very much like you. It'd be a boots on the ground approach, and it's working with communities to understand the issues that they're currently facing, or
Yes.
looking to, for example, create a range of roundtable events and do some proper in-depth research because the research that we have out there is great, but in terms of a longitudinal approach, internal organizations or community organizations need to know from a starting point, however many years have passed, what the issues, what are the reoccurring themes, what are the reoccurring issues. Um, and whilst that would be a starting point, there's so much more to do to that because it's such a huge piece of work, and we're never as people or as community orientated people or representatives within organizations, we're never gonna tick every single box. We're never gonna get everything done because there's new challenges, there's old challenges which come about. Um, and I think there's so much there in terms of a development concept at the same time. I think
Yes.
like moving away from politics though, what has been some of the most, say, influential work that you've seen being done for communities and also their voices be heard?
I think from a personal again personal point of view, Lee, I remember addressing those specific points that you've made, and what we would do. Say we're talking about when I was working in the communities, and we would always have open days. We would have roundtable events. We would always, and there was method in my madness. I would always invite the media to record the social
Yeah,
history of, say, for instance, the Somalian population, the
yeah,
social history of the Irish community, the Polish community, and really, share their voices, share their journeys, and really raise the profile at every opportunity. And it was all about improving services for, our client group. Yes, it'll be around mental health issues, but it was
yeah,
amazing. The feedback we got was very, very positive and very empowering for those individuals who feel that their voices were not heard. And if you could use the dynamics of marketing, public relations, small events to large conferences, because I organized a conference at the Echo Arena inviting 500 delegates and also inviting politicians,
okay,
key decision makers to
yeah.
really, really listen to the community voices and again, to influence the key decision makers in terms of their mental health or their service provisions, and it was very, very successful.
I think I totally get you on that aspect. And I love the idea of recording social history because
Mhm.
every day is history, isn't it? Every
It
day we
really
live
is.
through. And I think that's one of the biggest issues is like you just said, is being counted, having your voice heard and being represented. Um, and it's there's like I said, there's many different communities, a community within itself, but you've got communities within communities,
Yes,
and it's the deeper down within these communities you go, the more underrepresented they are, if you would.
yes.
And I think I think if you was going to say one thing to empower communities to use their voice, what would it be?
Never ever be afraid to stand up and to challenge. And maybe I think it's easier for me to say because that's always been my background. I've always challenged the norm. I've always had a voice because again, it's to do with my experience, my life experience. And really, knocking down the doors and saying this is not acceptable to key decision makers. We are all accountable
Yeah,
and never be afraid to stand up to something that you're passionate about and you truly believe in, because you know what, if you don't do it, then nothing's going to change. And use your voice, use your influence, and use your power to change,
yeah.
and don't accept mediocre. Always strive for the very, very best.
Yeah, I think the power of change you mentioned, some people can be scared of change, but change can be such a good thing. And it's also a ripple effect, isn't it? So
It
once
is.
one person does it, the ripple effect happens. They then know about it, and then they've done it to their friends and so. And then this is how communities it becomes more impactful, and communities actually it becomes a wraparound support approach.
It really does.
I
It
think
really does.
I mean, it is. I'm just trying to think of like a longer or wider issue at the moment, which is currently happening, and there's so many different things which affects communities. But I think it's a starting point with boots on the ground, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. And Lee, just to use maybe a recent example,
Mm,
just sort of the yesterday, there was a sort of an initiative around, community engagement, again, based within a local community.
yeah.
And it was to do with dance, it was to do with drama, it was to do with, welcoming people from abroad and
Okay.
embracing, the uniqueness of Liverpool and raising the profile of Liverpool. That in
Yeah.
itself was a positive outcome because everybody felt their voices were being heard. They
Yeah.
felt empowered, and also it got out to the wider media. So it just those small things and the ripple effect can be not only locally, it could be nationally and
Nationally,
also
yeah,
internationally as well.
absolutely. And I
I
think
love international things. Yeah.
we're all family at the end of the
Yeah,
day,
we
and
really are.
we're all people. But it's lovely to hear you say that. But I have to be that person though and say we're coming to the end. And I wish we had more time to talk about this because I could talk about community representation for hours. It's what we do. It's just as general people. But
Mhm.
you've been fantastic. You've been a fantastic course, Judy. Thank you for taking the time and telling us about the importance of voices of communities and why representation matters. I do have one final thing for you, though. Is there anything you'd like to say before we head off?
Yeah, I would just like to say that again, sometimes we gravitate to the job that we're doing here. And I think it's very, very important to remember why we're doing the work that we're doing and really embracing the challenges that maybe, that we face and indeed are ahead of us. And but also always remember what we're doing, how we're doing it, and it's all about community and it's all about the people. And that's my final word. Go with your
Brilliant.
heart and just do the best you can.
Oh, that was lovely. Thank you, Judy.
My pleasure, Lee.
Well, here at the Hub, we have a range of community partners who are on hand to help. And should you need it, our website is full of information that you can take at your own pace. We have a whole section on BAME support, and we also have local organisations that you can get in touch with. Judy, like she mentioned, is also part of the Hub too, and she's here to help. And you can contact Judy via our website, and the fountain of knowledge that she is will put you in touch with our partners um, within the community. We have lots of local links. But if you notice something on our website isn't there or need a new addition, please do send us some feedback and we'll ensure that is there in the future. But until next time, thanks for joining us. Be safe and be good.
Resilience is strength. Let us help you find yours.